At 2 o'clock in the morning, on the 23rd of January, 1973, the people of a small fishing town in Iceland were asleep in their beds. None of them knew that the ground beneath their town had not erupted in nearly 6,000 years. None of them knew that it was about to. They woke to a sound they would later describe as a jet engine, growing louder, coming from somewhere just east of town. Some of them thought their neighbor's house was on fire. They ran outside to look. What they saw was the earth itself, splitting open along a line nearly 2 kilometers long, throwing lava fountains 50 to 150 meters into the night sky, less than a kilometer from their front doors. This is an island, 2 miles off the southern coast of Iceland. 5,000 people lived there. There was no road out. There was only the sea, and the volcano had given them almost no warning at all. What happened in the hours, the months, and the decades that followed is one of the most remarkable stories of human defiance against a natural disaster ever recorded. A town that should have been buried entirely. A harbor that should have been sealed forever. A community that by any reasonable expectation should not exist today. And yet, if you sail toward this island now, you will see green cliffs rising from the Atlantic, a working fishing harbor, a town built on streets with names, and beneath some of those streets, frozen in place exactly as it was on that January morning, a house that the lava buried completely, never touched by human hands again, until archaeologists came to dig it free. This is Vestmannaeyjar, the Westman Islands. And this is the story of the only town in Icelandic history that has ever had to fight a volcano for its own survival, and won. Long before the eruption of 1973, the people of Heimaey told each other an old story. An ancient prophecy passed down through generations claimed that disaster would return to these islands only if 3 specific conditions were ever met. The town would have to grow beyond a certain hill called Heimaey. An old pool called Vilpa would have to be filled in and abandoned, and a bishop's son would have to be ordained as the island's priest. For centuries, the conditions seemed safely out of reach. The town stayed small. The pool stayed in use. No bishop's son was ever ordained here. And then, in the years leading up to 1973, almost without anyone noticing, all 3 conditions were quietly fulfilled. The town had expanded past Heimaey. The Vilpa pool had been filled in years earlier after a child drowned there. And in the early months of 1973, a young man named Karl Sigurbjörnsson, the son of a bishop, was ordained as priest of Vestmannaeyjar. The old prophecy said pirates would come. Instead, the earth itself opened. Whether you believe in old prophecies or not, the people of these islands had every reason to feel that something had been building toward this moment for a very long time. The land here had never been calm. The Vestmannaeyjar archipelago sits on one of the most volcanically active systems in Iceland, a chain of islands and submarine cones built by 70 to 80 separate eruptions over the last 15,000 years. Just 10 years before the disaster that struck the town itself, the islanders had watched a new island being born from the ocean a few kilometers away. Between 1963 and 1967, an undersea eruption built an entirely new piece of land from nothing. Black volcanic rock rising out of the waves until it became a permanent island. They named it Surtsey, after a fire giant from Norse mythology. Many of the same fishermen who would later watch their own town burn had sailed out to watch Surtsey being born, fascinated by a process that felt, at the time, like something happening to someone else's world. They had no way of knowing that the same volcanic system was about to turn its attention to the town where they slept every night. The fissure that opened on the night of January 23rd ran almost 2 kilometers long, cutting across the eastern edge of the island, dangerously close to the edge of town. The Icelandic Civil Defense Organization activated the town's alarm within minutes. Sirens sounded across the island. People who had been asleep moments before found themselves running through the streets toward the harbor, carrying whatever they could grab: documents, photographs, a few changes of clothes, sometimes nothing at all. And then something happened that, in hindsight, almost certainly saved every life on that island. A storm, in the days before the eruption, had forced the island's entire fishing fleet back into harbor. Boats that would normally have been scattered across the North Atlantic, days away from home, were instead tied up at the dock, fully fueled, fully crewed, ready to leave. Within 8 hours of the fissure opening, the Civil Defense Organization had evacuated nearly the entire population of the island, 5,273 people, across the water to the Icelandic mainland. Almost no one was injured. Almost no one was left behind, except a small number of volunteers who chose to stay. What followed was 5 months of continuous eruption. Lava fountains that reached heights of 150 meters. A new volcanic cone rising where there had been ordinary ground only days before. A cone the islanders would eventually name Eldfell, Fire Mountain. The lava advanced toward the town with the slow, unstoppable patience of something that does not need to hurry. By the end of January, ash and volcanic debris, called tephra, had already begun burying houses under layers that would eventually reach 5 meters deep in places. The volunteers who stayed behind faced a decision that no town had faced in quite this way before. The lava was moving toward the harbor, the only harbor on the island, the foundation of its entire fishing economy, the one piece of infrastructure that could not be allowed to disappear without losing the town's only reason to exist. So they decided to fight it. Using pumps drawn directly from the surrounding ocean, the volunteers began spraying seawater onto the advancing edge of the lava flow, cooling it, slowing it, hardening it into rock before it could continue moving forward. It had never been attempted at this scale before. Engineers had used water to redirect small lava flows in Hawaii and at Mount Etna, but nothing approaching the scale of what was needed here. For weeks, the operation continued around the clock. Pumps running constantly, volunteers working in shifts in freezing conditions, soaked by ocean spray and surrounded by heat that could be felt from dozens of meters away. The lava front, where it met the seawater, hissed and cracked and threw up clouds of steam that rolled across the island like a second artificial fog. They built walls. They dug trenches to redirect the flow away from the most vulnerable streets. They measured, recalculated, and adjusted their efforts day by day as the lava found new paths and they found new ways to block them. Slowly, through that entire spring, the operation began to work. The lava that had threatened to seal the harbor entirely was redirected, cooled, and stopped just short of closing it completely. The harbor survived. barely, by inches that had been earned through months of relentless, dangerous, improvised engineering carried out by ordinary islanders who had never been trained for anything like this. The eruption finally ended on the 3rd of July, 1973, 5 months and 10 days after it began. By the time it was over, 400 homes had been destroyed or buried. 60% of the town's structures had been damaged or lost entirely. The island's land area had grown by more than 2 square kilometers. New ground, built entirely from the lava that had tried to destroy everything on the old ground beneath it. The question that remained was simple and impossibly difficult. Would anyone come back? On a residential street called Gerdisbraut, a family named Sigurdardóttir and Olafsson had built a house in 1971. They lived there with their 3 sons for less than 2 years before the eruption began. When the evacuation siren sounded, they left with everything else, taking what they could carry, leaving the rest of their lives behind in rooms they assumed they would return to within days. They never returned, not to that house. By the time the ash stopped falling, their home, along with hundreds of others, was buried beneath layers of volcanic tephra and pumice that in some places reached 10 meters deep, 3 to 10 times the height of a person, standing directly on top of where their kitchen, their bedrooms, their children's toys had been. For decades, the buried street remained exactly as the eruption had left it. A neighborhood interred beneath its own town, present but inaccessible, a layer of the island's history sealed shut by ash that had long since hardened into solid rock. In the years after the eruption, archaeologists and historians on the island began to ask a question that had not been asked before. What would happen if they dug one of these houses out? Not for the materials, not for reconstruction, for memory, for the chance to stand inside a moment that had been frozen, instantaneously and completely, by a force no one could have controlled. The excavation of the house on Gerdisbraut became the foundation of a museum that the islanders named Eldheimar, the Pompeii of the North, as it is sometimes called, in deliberate reference to the ancient Roman city frozen by Vesuvius nearly 2,000 years before. Visitors can now walk through the remains of an ordinary Icelandic family home from 1971. Wallpaper still visible in places, a dishwasher, and a sewing machine recovered intact. The layout of rooms where 3 young boys once slept, now exposed to careful light and quiet observation. There is something almost unbearably intimate about it. A house is usually the most private place a family has. This one became, against every intention of the people who built it, one of the most public monuments on the island, a physical record of an ordinary life interrupted in an instant by something far larger than any single family could withstand. In the years that followed the eruption, the people of Vestmannaeyjar found one more use for what the volcano had left behind. The new ground, still warm from below, was tapped for residual heat. From 1974 until 1988, the cooling lava field heated homes and water across the island, turning the very force that had destroyed so much of the town into the thing that kept its survivors warm through 14 winters. As soon as the eruption ended on the 3rd of July, 1973, the cleanup began, and so did the return. Not everyone came back. Some families, having rebuilt their lives on the mainland in the 5 months of the eruption, chose to stay there permanently. The population of Vestmannaeyjar has never fully recovered to its pre-eruption numbers. Even decades later, the island carries a smaller community than it once held. But many did return. They returned to streets buried under volcanic ash that had to be physically cleared, house by house, before anyone could even see what remained underneath. They returned to a harbor that had nearly closed and a fishing industry that depended entirely on that harbor surviving. They returned, essentially, to start over on the same ground that had almost taken everything from them. Today, if you walk through the town, you will find markers, simple columns positioned at points across Vestmannaeyjar that show the exact height the ash and pumice reached during the worst of the eruption. One stands beside the town hall, 165 centimeters tall. Stand next to it, and the ash would have reached well above your head. The volcano itself, Eldfell, has remained quiet since 1973, but it has not been forgotten or ignored. Iceland's geological and meteorological institutes maintain constant seismic monitoring, GPS sensors, and thermal imaging across the Vestmannaeyjar volcanic system, ensuring that if magma ever begins moving again beneath these islands, the warning will come this time, unlike the warning that never came in 1973. Visitors today can climb Eldfell in about an hour, reaching a summit that did not exist before that January morning over 5 decades ago, looking down across a town that the mountain itself had once tried to erase. The lava fields surrounding it have slowly accumulated moss and grass, the black rock softening at the edges into something closer to green. The wound, healing the way wounds on this island always seem to heal, slowly, visibly, and without ever fully disappearing. Surtsey, the island born from the sea in the eruption that preceded all of this, still exists too. Now, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, scientists treat it as a pristine, natural laboratory, an island where nothing has ever been deliberately introduced, where every plant, every bird, every trace of life that exists there arrived entirely on its own, allowing researchers a rare, unmanipulated window into how life colonizes a place that began as nothing but cooling rock. And the islands themselves remain home to one of the largest puffin colonies anywhere in the North Atlantic. Tens of thousands of birds returning each summer to cliffs that have witnessed eruptions, evacuations, and reconstructions across thousands of years of human and geological history, entirely indifferent to any of it, simply continuing the rhythm they have always followed. There is a particular kind of courage required to rebuild a home on ground that has already tried to destroy it once. Not the dramatic courage of the moment, the courage of running toward the harbor in the middle of the night, the courage of spraying seawater onto advancing lava for months on end. That courage is easier to recognize, easier to admire from a distance. The harder courage is what came after. The decision, made by thousands of ordinary people, to return to a town that had buried 400 of their neighbors' homes, to fish from a harbor that had nearly been sealed shut forever, to raise children on an island that geologists will tell you honestly could erupt again at any time. That is not the courage of a single dramatic night. That is the quieter, longer courage of choosing every single morning for the rest of your life to stay somewhere that the earth has already shown you it is capable of trying to take away. We want to hear from you. If your home had been buried beneath 10 meters of ash and the ground beneath it remained capable of erupting again, would you have gone back? What would it take for a place to remain home, even after everything it had cost you? Tell us in the comments. We read every single one. If this story moved you, please subscribe to the channel to join us on our future journeys, and share this video with someone who needs to hear about a town that fought a volcano with nothing but seawater and refused to lose.